Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us. It's interesting. This webinar is called Recovery Roundtable, and we're talking about today. Recovery is one of the biggest topics in the fitness industry and is a vital aspect of every training plan. With so much newfound focus on recovery, there are many new technologies and trends coming to light. And our wonderful panel of experts tonight, of which we welcome Dr. Mike. He's replacing Ronnie Fulton, who unfortunately got the flu, which is terrible. We're going to talk about how to properly program recovery, as well as different recovery methods to maximize training, and then use those methods to grow your business. And I think that that's really interesting. I'm Sarah Cooperman. I'm the CEO of SCW. I'm here with Carter Anderson, who's running our webinar this evening. And I've got these wonderful people. I've got Kelly Roberts. She was named IDEA International. Yeah, wave your hand because they're probably confusing it with Brian. Yeah, I'm sure, Kelly. Okay. She was named IDEA International Fitness Instructor of the Year and SCW's Best Female Presenter as well. And she got a Lifetime Achievement from I always pronounce this wrong, OBO Awards, and was inducted into the National Fitness Hall of Fame several years ago. She was also honored as the Presenter of the Year, as well as Inspiration Award for Empower Conventions. She is ACSM certified. She holds certifications through ACE, through everybody, and she's one of the SCW faculty members. She leads our personal training certification. She's also in the middle of authoring a personal training certification for active agers for SCW. She's a Schwinn Senior Master Trainer and a RICA Ambassador. So we welcome Kelly. We've got Brian Bettendorf with us. He's got a master's degree in management and a master's degree in kinesiology. He's the head of education for Rumble Roller and a managing partner in Drake Global Strategies, a consulting firm which helps fitness and sporting goods companies develop their brands. So he's really a creator of new projects. He helps accelerate growth. Really kind of cool. He's been in the fitness industry for over 20 years and as a practitioner, operator, educator. He sold a physical therapy and fitness company that he co-founded. And he spent time during his early years at TRX in a variety of product marketing, education, and business development roles. So we welcome Brian. And then we also have Dr. Mike with us, which it's really exciting to get to know him. He's been coming to conferences recently, but we found him during the pandemic. So we feel really lucky. There is always a silver lining, even with a pandemic, right? He's a PhD. He's certified by everybody. He actually got his PhD with Dr. Len Kravitz, which is cool. And he currently teaches in the Exercise Science and Sports Performance program at Grand Canyon University in Phoenix, Arizona. He's spoken at over 40 events, including many for NSCA and other organizations. He's published in over 24 peer-reviewed and non-peer research journals. He's written 9 book chapters in the areas of sports nutrition and strength training and conditioning. And there I go. Now, finally, I can breathe. So we're really glad to have him on this panel. And I'm starting with you, Kelly. How do you define recovery? Oh, one quick thing. You guys, we have a small group here tonight. We've got about 30 people on, which is great, small for us. We have about almost 148 or whatever, almost 150 registrants. So the cool thing is the people who show up, we want you to be able to type in your questions if you have any questions or suggestions. So do me a favor, type in your name and where you're from in the chat box. And all you do is go down to the center of the page. You all know what to do. You're going to see that green chat box. Go to the left of it and click on chat. And please type it. Yep, there's Jerry from Boston. Thank you, Jerry. Bob Esqueri is from Boca Raton. We've got Liz from Missouri, Pam from Raleigh, North Carolina, Deborah from Florida, Maria from Illinois, all these people. This is great. Oh, and Joshua Craddock, who's a wonderful presenter. He's here with us from Maryland. Joshua, I hope you present with us at DC Mania. That's going to be exciting. All right, guys. So, Kelly, I'm hitting you up. How do you define recovery?
Well, there's a lot of different ways to define recovery. I think your ability to perform at what it is you perform at to a high level. Bishop et al. In 2007 defines recovery as the ability to meet or exceed performance in a particular activity. So in other words, you've recovered enough to be able to perform at a high level or a higher level than where you were before. So you're training, you have adapted and you have recovered enough to be able to perform at an expected level.
And I think that's really cool because everybody, including myself, thinks of recovery as I'm going to stretch, I'm going to meditate, I'm going to roll, I'm going to, it's got that connotation. But I think that really kind of nails it on the head. And Kelly, you brought up before we turned the camera on about some of the protocols you use to help yourself recover, especially in your cycling competitions.
Yeah, I do all the traditional things like foam rolling, stretching. I am absolutely possessive of my sleep. I am absolutely adamant about getting my at least 8 hours of sleep a night. And I hydrate and I eat well. I make sure I eat correctly. But I do some active recovery strategies like super easy bike rides. And it was interesting, Dr. Mike was talking about periodization. And I learned about active recovery when I was working with a cycling coach in competition. And I had a linear periodized program where each mesocycle was focused on a specific area to build that type of fitness towards the macrocycle of the national championships. And every week I would do an easy ride. And the instructions from my coach were at an embarrassingly low speed, ride high cadence on a flat course for an hour, keeping your heart rate below 120. So my ego got in the way more than anything. It was the hardest ride when I started doing it. It was the hardest ride I would do every week because I would get passed by people on Frankenstein bikes with platform pedals wearing a camelback, and I was on my 17-pound carbon road bike.
And you're riding along, and I'm probably ahead of you now in my little Schwinn.
You would have been.
Like
You absolutely would have been.
1980s, yeah.
Yeah, you would have been. But I mean, the interesting thing for me was I went from hit or miss getting on the podium to be consistently on the podium. I slowed down. I added structured recovery into my program, and I performed at a much higher level consistently.
So integrating recovery.
By integrating recovery.
Very cool. And Dr. Mike, could you talk a little bit about the periodization that we had discussed?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, if you look at just the basic periodization protocols, the traditional ones, I mean, there's many variations and methods, even more now. But you look at even from the early 2000s to the mid 2000s, you look at undulating or like nonlinear periodization, where you actually can integrate recovery within day and also within the week recovery. So, for example, Monday might be reps of like 3 to 5. Wednesday might be like 8 to 12. Friday might be like 12 to 15. The next week, then you rotate those out. So you're addressing within day also, but within week recovery as well. And of course, before we started, we're talking about how most people, when they talk about or think about recovery, they only think of like a one-dimensional perspective in terms of like the actual training. You need to be thinking about recovery from a three-dimensional, point of view. You have the basic, definition with which Kelly talked about, and I could even add on to that. It's basically like the process of growth and physiological adaptation. You're taking somebody from a fatigue state to a less fatigue state or no fatigue state while you're actually adapting in the process, so that by the time you do your subsequent training sessions and even chronic adaptation, you're actually at a higher level above baseline than where you actually really started. So there's different forms of recovery. I know we're talking about that, but yeah, that's essentially the essence of it.
That's interesting. And Brian, what are your thoughts on defining recovery?
I think the challenge in defining it is that it's really hard to be objective and come up with a definition that my guess is everybody can agree with. And that's not to say I'm disagreeing with anybody's point of view. I mean, I think about it as the time from when you complete an exercise session to when you begin the next one. But the kind of true objective measures around this are really difficult. So I think it as much comes down to kind of good quality programming and how the individual whom you're working with is feeling at that moment in time.
Yeah, that's so interesting because, you know, as we do our conferences, we're always doing titles. And I think, Kelly, you mentioned that you're now doing work. You've been doing workshops since when? 2009, you said, for Schwinn on recovery. Was it 2009?
2000, I think I started 2018 for Schwinn doing recovery.
Okay, and please describe that because I thought that was really interesting.
Well, I developed a recovery ride, a program on recovery for Schwinn. And that was in 2018, and it was wildly unpopular. I could not drag people into the room. If it had been hit, it would have been like that. But recovery, 4 years ago was a really hard sell because people weren't interested in it. There was just not a lot of interest. And fast forward to today, I've seen a lot of momentum build around that, and now that session has become a really popular one. So not like HIT. It doesn't sell out where a HIT session would, but definitely there's more interest in recovery than there was 4 years ago, I'm seeing now.
Yes, we see that at the conferences. People go crazy about sessions on sleep, sessions on cortisol reduction, sessions on ways to address inflammation effectively. And we see that people really want this. But I still think that people are thinking it's about foam rolling. It's about meditation. It's about breathing. Do you, Brian, I see you kind of nodding there, and obviously you're obviously very involved with foam rolling because that's the company you sold, right? Was it Rumble Roller?
No, I was just partnering with them.
Yeah. So it is so much more popular. And if we're talking about growing our programs, we have to look at what the public wants. And what I always find it very interesting is that the fitness conventions that we manage are always between 3 to 6 months ahead of what's going to go on in the clubs, because we're the ones dealing with the instructors and the trainers, and they're going, I want to see what's the newest trend. What am I going to be working on? And I see recovery getting huge. So if you're looking to grow your programs, then this is some of the things you want to think about, which is the recovery. Do you see, you deal with a lot of businesses, Brian. What are you seeing as far as the trends go with recovery?
Well, to your point, I mean, everybody's kind of jumping into this right now. I mean, I feel like, Therabody and Hyperice remind me of the the arms wars of the 80s between the USA and Russia. Like they both keep coming out with these new products every 6 months, which is pretty cool. And you were talking about hydro massage, and everybody's throwing that into their marketing language these days. So there's definitely a lot more people getting involved in it, which is good.
Yeah, I was talking to Paul, who is the CEO. I think he's actually also one of the creators of Hydro Massage today. And it's fascinating because he said that his sales are better in 2022 than they were in 2019. And I asked him, what type of clubs are purchasing these products? Because this is a big unit. This is over $10,000 that you're spending on a unit, but it can bring ancillary revenue to the facility And what they found, and again, I apologize for throwing this in, but I always feel this very strong affinity towards owners, managers, and directors of facilities, because they have to come back, or we as group fitness instructors and personal trainers won't have a place to go. So I look at the owners and managers, and what they're doing is they're integrating these hydro massage big machines that undulate water, and it can do different temperatures, and it can do different speeds in different areas of the body. But instead of selling it, like I was thinking, what do? Do you sell it for like an hour massage for $45 or 90 or whatever? And Paul said, no, what they've been using it as is a way to elevate the membership. So instead of just getting a basic membership to the facility where you get to use the weights and you get some of the free group X sessions, you go for a premier membership that integrates 3 different 10-minute intervals, like over the week, like Monday, Wednesday, Friday, or Monday, Thursday, Saturday, whatever, little 10-minute intervals where you can throw the massage in. And I thought that, and that makes the premier membership, brings in extra revenue to the facility. And this is something that people want. And you were talking about like some of the vibration technology, which is the Therabody, the Hyperice, and stuff like that. Dr. Mike, what do you see? Do you see that also being pulled into personal training strategies or other methodologies?
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that, because I was actually I met with a company on Friday, and it's actually a high-rise residence in downtown Phoenix that just opened up back in February, and they have a couple of other locations. It was essentially a residence that also includes the membership within, like, so you're a resident, you get access to the gym and facility, but you also can pay for a separate membership if you're not a resident. So it's on the 9th floor. They have, hoist and like matrix machines, and, they have a whole outside, turf with, landmine attachments, boxing stuff, med balls, kettlebells, and all that stuff, and so, one of the things that I'm trying to get them like to do and think about is basically what you just said is you need to be thinking about, integrations of like, recovery and all these things that come with it, because you can make money both on the front end with the membership with the residents, and on the back end if somebody just wants to sign up just for the membership and they don't even really live there, right? So you can actually do both. And I think one of the future, I could say trend, obviously, because trends come and go, but I think something that in the future that a lot of residents, what are not houses, but more like apartments and high rises, I think the trend is actually integrating a lot of these different components within that company. So they have a lot of different amenities because it draws more traction and more marketing and business, et cetera. So that's something I think on the business side that you will likely see more in the next 3 to 5 years.
Oh yeah. Like hydro massage, and keep bringing this up, sorry about that, but they also have a machine that's the cryotherapy machine. And I'm like, and I don't know if you guys have done it, but it's awesome. You jump in I went to one of those where you feel like you're in this cylinder, and you've got to wear gloves, and you've got to wear these things on your feet, and you're wearing a towel, and and you drop the towel and you're like freezing, and everybody can see you from here, and just hope to God you don't jump anytime soon. But it was like, and what is it, 100 and what's the temperature of those, Brian, do you know?
Too cold.
Too cold. It's very, very cold. But it's kind of cool. But these cryotherapy machines, you got to be, as a lawyer, I get nervous. I'm like, oh my God, what about the frostbite? If you forget, if somebody isn't watching you and they go in without the gloves or without the socks. But the neat thing about this machine is that you can put it on different body parts, and it has a set time limit that you can only do it for a certain amount of time. Dr. Mike, I interrupted you. Please go ahead.
No, it's okay. That's something that I think about. I think about it like, how does it work physiologically, for one? And then does it even make sense physiologically? Because most people can't really survive in extreme heat or even extreme cold, right? It's I don't know the mechanisms of how those work, but you can kind of do the basic version of that. If you don't want to purchase it, if you're not a business, you can just take like colder showers. So
Interesting.
yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. So what are the different variables of fatigue clients face and how do you recover from them? Brian, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I think about this oftentimes in kind of different buckets or categories, right? You can think about the soft tissue, which might be, your muscle predominantly, because that's where people are going to feel, right? They get the soreness there as a indicator of that. You can think of cardiovascular, where we're monitoring heart rate. There's kind of the neural or immunological or hormonal that I think a little bit harder for us to get our arms wrapped around in the settings that we're in. And then also, as we talked about, kind of the psychological or mood state that we can get into. So those are the variables I kind of think about and where I tend to lean more towards, just because the ease of use is this subjective mood state and or heart rate variability.
And Kelly, you were talking about mood state, some of the research that you had read. Can you share that with us?
Yeah, Jack Raglan out of the University of Indiana I've got it on the screen in front of me, did a study with swimmers. It was over 7 seasons. So it was a reasonably long study, 170 varsity swimmers. And, 4 seasons, 170 swimmers. And they identified swimmers who showed signs of compromised performance in response to intensive training, and they were conducted a profile of mood state, a POMS scale. And what they found was, with a 7-item subset of POMS items, they found that the people who were actually performing poorly were having mood disturbances, were depressed, depression being the number one. Depression, feelings of uselessness, poor sleep, but depression being probably the number one. And it makes sense because cortisol suppresses your serotonin. And so endurance athletes show very high levels of cortisol exposure, much higher than other athletes, according to some studies. That was according to, I can't even pronounce the names, but from 2012. But from studies confirm that long-term cortisol exposure is significantly higher in endurance athletes. And so cortisol suppresses your serotonin. And so it would make sense that if you've got high cortisol, that you would feel bad. You would have depression because your serotonin, your feel-good neurotransmitter, would be suppressed.
Yeah,
And
it's
sleep
interesting.
is disrupted too.
And I think I brought this up was this is pretty embarrassing, but I get really nervous before I present, whether it's at a conference or it's online. Like I was presenting for CanFit Pro and I was doing my yoga chair, and I was nervous because I had my PowerPoint on my portable computer, and then I had to run into the basement, and I was using my phone as my camera, and I was using my computer for my sound, and I'm like, and then my earbuds were my microphone, and I'm like, something's not going to be charged, something's going to broke. My husband's going to turn on some video somewhere, the dog's going to start barking. So I was freaking out. I was getting myself so nervous that I couldn't focus. So I remembered, cortisol. The buildup with cortisol reduces the quality of your performance. I picked up the dog. I went for a good, 15, 20-minute walk with the dog at a nice clip, just a walk, got back. I was calmed down, and I, launched into the presentation. And I think, I read so much about cortisol right now, and of course it does affect your sleep and obviously affects your performance. So I think that of course affects your recovery, and we need to focus on that. And you said you really guard your sleep, Kelly, and I think that's really interesting. I was at dinner with my niece, what is she, in her early 30s? She's got this really cute boyfriend. She's adorable. And she's like, sleep, I have to get my own sleep. I sleep, I kick him out and he's in the guest room and I have done it. I'm like, well, that's not romantic, but I'm sure she's gotten better sleep. Who knows? I don't know. So what variables do you measure with clients when programming recovery into their plans? How do you measure your clients, Dr. Mike, or what are some of the protocols you might recommend?
Yeah, I think on a basic level, I mean, you have heart rate and you have HRV or heart rate variability. You also have different other software, like I believe like the BioForce or like Omega Wave. Like it basically measures like HRV. One of the things about HRV, because I remember talking about this a long time ago when I was talking about like overtraining stuff, is that one of the limitations with some of the software things, not that they're not effective, it's just that it may tell you based upon, it doesn't differentiate between, oh, you're ready to train today, you're getting ready to go, but oh, you have a massive like emergency that happens, you have to take care of this. Or it may say that you're ready to train, but you've only had 2 meals today, or you're low on water intake or whatever it is. So it doesn't take into consideration some of the more like subjective, feelings, if you would. And this is kind of like,
so like if you're doing those Whoop rings, or everybody's using their watches. What's fascinating is there's a brand new trend where they've been manufacturing, okay, they used to be $1,500, now they're $800. It's a shirt you can actually wear that measures the body's retention of water. It measures your hydration. And they use these in professional athletes. Like, I can't wait until they bring those shirts down to about $80 so that we all, at least some of us can afford to buy them, or maybe $8, where we can measure our hydration. Do you like the Whoop rings? Do you like different type of methods for telling hydration or the body's recovery capabilities?
Yeah, I do. But I also think like there's invasive measures and non-invasive stuff. I mean, to get more of the truly accurate measures, like you have to do the more invasive stuff. I mean, if you really want to know, it's like trying to find out what your blood work is by, putting your hands on a device and, letting it read out, because most of those things, even like for a handheld bioimpedance measures, like for body composition, they're based off certain equations like height, weight, age, basic demographics. If you're, white or African American, like it doesn't, like there's not a lot of specific athlete equations, like 65-year-old white female who's also like a runner type of thing. Like, so keep in mind, like these devices are often based off equations and just going to give you a rough estimate.
Yeah, interesting. Brian, I see you kind of nodding there. What are your thoughts on that?
I agree with absolutely everything Mike said. Now, listen, I think all these things are just meant to be tools. And so, as Mike had pointed out, I think there can be a lot of value in using them to help guide what you do or don't do. On the flip side, I think we've all had people also who can kind of over focus on the numbers and almost get too much anxiety about seeing a certain trend line. And so you got to put it all into perspective and think about how, as everyone's talked about, putting all the pieces together to look at it holistically rather than just the number by itself.
Yeah, and it's interesting. We just got a question from, I'm going to pronounce this and I hope I do it correctly, Cognac. May I ask about recovery techniques for smaller clubs? Let's say boutique, small boutique facilities or senior centers. And she also asked, with your dog walking story, does pre-work improve post-work recovery? And I think that's really an interesting question. I think pre-work preps you for better performance, and possibly better performance. You feel better about yourself. It helps with recovery. But I do think it would help with recovery because I also think it would prevent injury. I think anytime pre-work and you can enter an activity and you feel comfortable and confident and ready to compete, whether it is a HIIT class or a cycle class or a yoga class that you're getting ready to teach, you're going to get a better, smoother workout that's more consistent that may help with recovery. But do you have any suggestions, Brian, what you would do with small boutique facilities. Or Kelly, do you have any suggestions for senior centers? Because I know you work with a lot of active agers.
I can begin then. I think for the smaller boutiques, right, you're often going to be limited on space and budget. And this is where some of the lower cost devices can come in, right? We've talked about the use of foam rolling or stretching or some of the percussive devices. All those things can work out well. I think, the nice thing about the foam rolling is that it's inexpensive. Most people are familiar with it, and it does a pretty good job at reducing, delayed onset muscle soreness and perceptions of fatigue. But I tend to look at all kind of recovery devices as sitting on a buffet. And when you go to a buffet, you get to choose and pick the foods that you like. And I think part of the benefit in these tools is one's individual belief in them. So even though I might feel that the foam rolling can have a beneficial effect, if my client thinks that there's another device that works better, then it's likely going to work better for them most of the time.
Yeah, and I like your buffet analogy, because nobody wants to eat the same barbecue chicken every night, except if it's mine, of course. But we want a buffet. We want options and choices. And Kelly, what do you think about with active agers or seniors?
With active agers, I think it depends on whether they're an athlete or not, as to whether they really need to be engaging in active recovery or some kind of recovery strategy. If they are an athlete and they are competing, then they have to be very strategic about their recovery, because as an aging, a master's athlete needs to be a lot more strategic than a younger athlete about how much intensity and how much recovery they need. So it depends on the population. For the average person, I was just at Rancho La Puerta in Tecate, Mexico, teaching, and they have, I think the average age of the guests there is 61. And so they have a lot of elderly people. And the most popular classes there are the stretch classes. They can't get enough of the stretching classes. They love it. More than yoga. Yoga's not as popular, but the stretch. So I think when you look at programming for more elderly populations, then incorporating things like stretching and foam rolling. If they can't get on the floor, then that can be a little bit more limiting. A chair can be a very good tool for chair yoga. You teach that. You could speak to that more than I can. But if you're working with an elderly client and they're an athlete, then you should be very, very serious about recovery, and whether it's an undulating periodization or a more traditional periodization scheme, recovery is absolutely key to performance as you get older for an athlete.
Yeah, and that's interesting. You bring up stretching and the fact that at Rancho La Puerta, the stretching programs are far more popular than the yoga programs. There's a business, I recommend all of you guys who are on this to check it out. It's Stretch Lab, and it's really a set protocol. A lot of these businesses that offer programs, it's almost pre-choreographed, and it's fascinating the way they run these programs, and they're huge. They're not gonna, some facilities, not every, of course, but a lot of the facilities are knocking it out of the park because it's a system of stretching. And then they do focus on PNF, proprio neuromuscular facilitation, with the stretching. And their clientele base tends to be either athletes or a bit older. So, and I hear what you're saying, Kelly. I think Manuel Velasquez, who's one of the lead instructors at Rancho La Puerta, has emphasized repeatedly about the stretch classes that are doing so well. Dr. Mike, do you see that stretching is getting to be more popular, or you're a professor right now? Are you seeing that some of the students are migrating towards sessions like that, or classes like that?
Yeah, I think it's always going to be popular, especially with the fitness, conventions with the true sport nutrition or like strength and conditioning, more base conferences. It's there and it's well attended, but it's not massively popular in a sense. So it's kind of interesting the dichotomy of the two types of areas we're stretching. But I think overall, most people are not aware that there's multiple different types of stretching methods and techniques out there. They're only kind of taught or heard of static or PNF, and now it's like you have more stretching that involves a lot more like ranges of motion and moving through different types of planes of motion versus just stretching out the hamstrings and glutes or whatever. Like you can actually integrate that more dynamically, especially when it comes to more of the like active dynamic warm-ups, in a sense. There's been tons of research over the last 10 years really that talks about even static stretching is a very poor choice for active warm-ups. And in fact, it's been shown repeatedly to decrease force production and motor recruitments and decrease central nervous system drive further workout. So there's a time and place for certain ones to do like prior to and even post.
Yeah, that's interesting. One thing I'm wondering also is how can you use these different programs not only to improve your current clients' performance and recovery, but also how to grow your clientele base? Do you see that? Brian, you work with a lot of branding, right? With a lot of different companies. How do you see them helping to grow their clientele base?
Yeah, so if there's a brand out there, and I mentioned Therabody and Hyperice before, I think a lot of consumers have heard about those brands. And so if you're carrying them in your facility, that can be a draw for people from a new customer perspective, but could also help from a retention perspective, much like how Hydro Massage is trying to do that value add to the membership. So I think the strong brands have the capacity to help facilities bring in customers or keep them, but probably doesn't have the same effect on unrecognizable brand names.
Right. And when we got that question on what can small facilities do, call the company, see if you can purchase maybe 10 units, resell them to your clients. And it's a way for you to make ancillary revenue and to service the clients. That's a good idea. We did also get a question, any additional tips for instructors for recovery? We often teach a lot without big recovery periods in between teaching. So Colleen asked that, and I'm throwing it at you, Kelly.
Yeah, I would love to answer that because as an instructor who teaches a lot, I think that is your biggest challenge, to make sure that you are actually getting adequate recovery. Because if you're teaching a lot of indoor cycling, you're probably teaching a lot of HIIT. You're probably teaching too much and too much HIIT. And so making sure that you are taking one, I take it from a perspective more of undulating periodization because I'm not training for a specific event at the moment. So I look at if I have a very high intensity day, the next day I'm going to go moderate or lower intensity depending on how hard or how high the intensity was the day before, based on also what my morning heart rate is the next day. If you don't have that choice, then try and program at least one day a week of active recovery. If you're doing a lot of cardiovascular training, if you're teaching a lot of indoor cycling, then definitely active recovery is a good strategy, with not just with foam rolling, of course with foam rolling, but also stretching and active recovery, things like going for a walk, a nice comfortable brisk paced walk that's flat, not hilly, that doesn't put any stress on your muscles. Going for a bike ride, either on a stationary bike or an easy flat ride on a bike, keeping your heart rate lower than 120, lower than your first ventilatory threshold, so that you can breathe comfortably in and out through your nose.
Yeah, if I could just add to that real quick, I think the vast majority of people, she makes a pretty good point. The vast majority of people really undervalue and underestimate the value of the lower intensity sessions and thinking that they're not going to get anything from it, but they're actually gaining a higher level of adaptation, both acutely and chronically. And I've said this statement for at least the last 6 or 7 years. It doesn't matter how much you train. It only matters what you're able to recover from. You can train, 5 days a week, but if you're not recovering, then what is that? How is that really helping you?
Yeah, I hear what you both are saying. I have to agree with you. And I have to say, as an instructor, one of the best things you can do is, if you're going to be teaching class, you don't need to demonstrate everything.
Right.
I take this wonderful yoga class, and the teacher actually said, if you want to be touched during class, we're in child pose, cross your hands over each other, and I'll know that you feel comfortable being touched. Otherwise, please keep your hands apart during child pose, which is when your toes are touching, your knees are apart, and you're sitting back on your heels, reaching your arms forward. And I thought that was great. So what the instructor did was, there were a few guru students in the front that knew every pose: warrior 2, reverse warrior, side angle pose, triangle. I mean, they knew the poses. So if people need to follow someone, they were able to follow the person in the front row. But the instructor was able to walk around the room and, do just very gentle physical cueing and touching the students, which of course you couldn't do during COVID, but we can do now if the clients want them. And it really, it was funny. I said to the instructor, I said, you are amazing. I love that you walk around and correct everybody, and you touch every single student. She goes, I do it because I'm exhausted. This is like my 3rd class of the day. And I thought, you know what? It's pretty brilliant. It's pretty brilliant. We're just about out of time. I'm going to take the screen just for a second, you guys. I'm going to show you that about Midwest Mania we have coming up just this coming weekend, next weekend, September 30th through October 2nd. We also, just so you know, we sell all the recordings from the conference. So we have over 100 sessions that are being recorded. That's about 120 hours of education. So please take a look. Very exciting. What a great conference that's going to be. And also, just so you guys know who are on the East Coast, we have Boston Mania that is going to be in November 11th through 13th. I hope that I'm correct in that date. And your brochures should have been received today. How exciting is that? So Dr. Mike, I want to thank you. Brian Buttendorf, I want to thank you. And Kelly Roberts, thank you as always for joining us. Carter, thank you for running this. I appreciate all of you being tuned in, and we will send you out a recording so you can check this out. Thank you guys, and everybody have a great night.
Thank you.
Thank you. Too.